And so my talk is on social evaluative concern and stress in middle childhood. So first, research. Experiences lead them to worries. And what kinds of worries are typical kids who worry about their peers? Are some children more likely than others to experience anxiety as a result of stress? And to what extent do the stressors encountered in daily lives influence social concerns with their peers? So social evaluative concern is marked by worries, about how kids will treat them and how they will perform. Increases in rejection by peers has shown increased social evaluative concerns, and how social evaluative concerns related to, and there's a construct called anxious solitude, which is a behavioral construct, where kids engage in solitary, onlooking behavior, where they really want to join into conversations, but they won't, because they will actually stand back and they'll experience social anxieties. And we're interested in how are these social concerns related to anxious solitude. Approximately 30% of anxious solitary children have a clinical range of social anxiety symptoms. So there's obviously some sort of relation, but it's not 100%. And we're going to be measuring social concern using the social anxiety scale for children, revised, and the familiar social scale. Another thing we're going to be looking at. So I posed the question: to what extent do stressors contribute to social evaluative concerns? But not all stressors are created equally. My study, we looked at two major types of stressors in the literature that have been looked at differently: life events and daily strain. Life events are characterized by low frequency and high severity, significant life readjustments, and they've been shown. There have been links shown between life events and anxiety sensitivities. It's been found that infants who experience a major traumatic event will show significant increases in internalizing behaviors, which included depression and anxiety. And it's also been found, one study found that increased life events among kids with anxiety disorders found that there were increased life events. Kids with increased life events, kids with anxiety disorders showed increased life events. However, they found that their siblings did not necessarily exhibit the same anxiety behaviors. So it's interesting that there are some kids who may have the exact same stressors who somehow don't develop these anxieties. So that's another question that we're going to be looking at. And some examples of some of the life events that we'll be looking at are things like the death of a parent, moving to a new school, or parents getting divorced. The other kind of stress we'll be looking at is daily strain. Daily strain is marked by high frequency and low severity. It's a very persistent type of stress where things happen, on a daily basis or very regularly. Examples of things that are considered daily strain are things like being pressured by peers to use alcohol or drugs, having academic troubles in school, or not having enough time to get to your next class. It's been shown there's a linear relationship between daily strain and anxiety symptoms. And they discovered, Alan Rapay and Samber also discovered that anxious children experience a greater number of severe life events and chronic adversaries, which chronic adversaries are basically daily strain. And they used retrospective maternal and child reports. They actually just had a clinical sample, though. They didn't use any developmental trajectories, which I plan to use. So there's been some limitations in the research. The stressors have been shown to have a strong relation to depression, but there's really not been a lot of evidence for social anxiety having the same. People haven't really looked at social anxiety to have the same kind of relation. A few studies actually have distinguished between different types of stressors, and very few actually have used the daily strain type of stress at all. This study is actually going to differentially look at the two different types of stressors. Most studies actually use cross-sectional designs. We're using a longitudinal design across 3 grades and 6 time points. And a few studies actually look at subclinical samples of anxious children. Most actually use like anxiety disorders as their examples. And we have a community sample with an over-selection of anxious children. And it's also a very underrepresented age group. Most of the literature is on adults, and there's some on very, very young children also. So the goal hypothesis of my study are that I believe that both daily strain and life events will be significant time-varying covariates for social evaluative concerns across middle childhood. In other words, kids who encounter increased stressors will show increases in subsequent measures of anxiety, and kids who encounter fewer stressors will show fewer signs of anxiety. And my second hypothesis is that daily strain will more greatly predict changes in social evaluative concerns across middle childhood. This is based on evidence that daily strain more greatly predicts psychological distress, and actually may even have a mediating factor. So it's believed that that's going to be a stronger relation. The third thing I'm going to be looking at This is actually a measure of if socioevaluative concerns are given a measure in time as our independent measure, and I dichotomized the sample into high and low daily strain just to kind of give a visual representation of what's going on. And we can see here that kids who exhibited a higher average daily strain rating score higher on socioevaluative concerns across all the time points, and then kids who have a lower average daily strain rating will score lower on these socioevaluative concerns. And then for life events, we see basically the same thing. It's a slightly less salient difference, but you can still kind of pretty easily see that the kids with higher life events will score higher on socioevaluative concerns. And then so to test our mediation model, we actually wanted to, this is kind of just the way that we were kind of conceptualize this issue, where kids who have, we expect mediation because stress does not appear to affect all people equally. There's been a lot of studies on how certain people will have more great negative impacts because of stress. And anxious solitary kids have been shown to have increased anxieties with specific external stressors such as exclusion. So we were kind of wondering if perhaps that there's sort of a similar difference with anxious solitary kids exhibiting stressors differently. So full results. I conducted hierarchical linear modeling with socioevaluative concerns my dependent measure. This way it was possible to evaluate whether time-varying covariates showed changes in both initial levels of my dependent variable as well as differing trajectories. Here we can see that anxious solitude has a significant impact on the intercept of socioevaluative concern, and that's right here. But it didn't. But children who have increased anxious solitude did not really. They showed basically the same trajectories over time, so they basically continued to have the same differences at each time. They did not increase or decrease at all. So then for life events, we can see here that there were significant differences between both the intercept, which is the starting point, and the trajectories. However, the effect sizes are so small that they basically show that there's really no difference going on. However, it's a very minor